Playwright Tom Stoppard is here. He is a three-time Tony Award winner. His plays include Travesties, Jumpers, Arcadia, and The Real Thing. In 1997, The Invention of Love opened in London and has since enjoyed successful runs in San Francisco and Philadelphia. This month, a play about the poet and Latin scholar A.E. Housman finally makes its way to Broadway. I am very pleased to welcome Tom Stoppard back to this table. Welcome back. Seems like old hat doing this, doesn't it?
Yes.
We've talked about this before, but because everybody's focused on it now. Tell me where the seeds of this play came from.
They came from the belated realization that this poet, A.E. Housman, whom I liked, was also, and indeed far more eminently so in his own world, a Latin scholar, a textual critic, a man whose business was to try to recover ancient texts from the corruptions which had been introduced into them by medieval scribes and so on. Yeah. I liked that. I liked the notion of a romantic poet and a classical scholar.
Now, you discovered this how? I mean, you just sort of
it wasn't
browsing around in the library?
It's rather embarrassing to talk of it as a discovery. I was probably the last person on my street to know.
Right. Of course.
It was, in fact, just browsing, as you say, in books which I'd had for years.
Not looking for anything, just
I was
surfing.
looking something up about Housman. A Shropshire Lad, which is the title of his famous book,
right,
is known as a title more than as a book, though it's also known for quite a surprising number of individual lines, because authors have plundered A Shropshire Lad for their titles almost as much as they've plundered Hamlet. Yeah. And Dennis Potter, the playwright, he's used a couple, I think. And there are phrases, blue remembered hills, into my heart and air that kills, the laurel and the rose line, faded quicker than the rose. He had quite an ear and a mind for future titles for other people's books.
But your play is about unrequited love.
Well, it is indeed a love story, and it's a story of unrequited love. Housman fell in love with a fellow undergraduate when he was a student at Oxford, which was in the late 1870s, 1880-ish, and he remained devoted to this student for the rest of the student's life, and indeed to the undergraduate's memory for the rest of Housman's own life. The object of his love was a jock, happy, healthy athlete,
yes,
and a science scholar,
right,
a good one, who went off to teach, didn't really feel or show very much interest in what Housman did, but Housman dedicated his monument to Moses Jackson, the monument being an edition of a particular Latin poet, a task which occupied him for 30 years.
What are you looking for? I want you to take me on a journey through the practice of a playwright. What are you doing there in your library, and what are you looking for, and do you have a mission? Do you have a purpose?
Well, I tell you, quite recently I saw a play I'd written 20-odd years ago, and at that time I wrote plays in a different way. I tried to work out where I was, what was happening, and there was some kind of map and so on. And the further down the years I got, the less I did that. So the process is quite hard to describe. Nowadays, I literally don't know the answer to your question. I don't know what I'm looking for. That's the point of the search.
Ah, so it is a voyage of discovery.
In the case of the play that we're talking about, a very, very important figure in it is Oscar Wilde,
right,
who is utilized or exploited in some playwright way as a figure who lived in apposition to Housman. And the best way of answering...
In what way?
Well, the best way of answering your initial question is that I didn't know that Wilde was in the play until I was a long way into trying to write it and think about it and read for it. And secondly, it was only at that moment that I realized with a deep sigh of relief that there was indeed a play to write, because without Wilde, I didn't really have, what's the word, a reason for the play's existence.
Yeah. Whatever. So did you, having discovered Wilde, I mean, that must have been a moment of celebration there. I mean, was there a moment when you said, here it is. Here is something that I can...
There was a moment when I realized that there was another dimension. There was
Yeah.
another axis.
Another axis and access and everything else that adds to both. That adds to your...
That's right. And then that's a very encouraging moment.
Yeah, so you got something you can hang it on, you got something to go delve into, you've got...
Yeah.
Most people believe, you and I have had this discussion as well, that, most people believe that that what you do best is the flight of language. That it is the capacity you have to create words and sentences and ideas that come rushing out of your character's brain and soul and mouth.
This is how my facial muscles
Yes,
have gone rigid, don't you? I have no idea how to cope with that kind of proposition.
I know. I made it up.
Thank you.
I made it up.
Thank you.
But it is, I mean, it's not easy going. Invention of Love is not easy going.
Well,
that's not a new idea for you either.
Let's be careful. It's easy going about things which are not easy necessarily. It's not hard going, I don't think. I mean, good heavens, I hope not. It's one doesn't like to think of oneself, any writer, himself, whatever the work is. It's not a technical work.
No.
Scientific works might be hard going in a certain sense.
Well, not only that, the purpose of the writer, in part, is to open up through craft and language,
through the
experience, wisdom, etc.
Look, it's a play. That's the foundation. It's
written to entertain an audience in a theater.
It's an event.
Right.
It takes place in a large room and people watch and listen. I mean, that is the foundation to everything. It's a narrative form. It's a storytelling art form. Stories work through the interplay of character and through the interplay of ideas. All these things are basic, and that's really why the play is at this theatre. In other words, it wouldn't be a potential event. It might be a text, but it just wouldn't be a theatrical event unless one was looking after those considerations and certainly not worrying about, flights of language. This is kind of that stuff. That's simply the expression of your individuality as a writer, for better or worse.
All right, let me come back to Invention of Love. Tell me what's the point
of
the play?
Oh, does it have to have one?
No, it doesn't. But give me, it doesn't.
You mean, when you've seen it, you feel you ought to go out thinking this is what Tom was up to?
Yes. I mean, I definitely want to know that. And do you object to that?
No, I don't.
What was Tom up to? I'm even interested in how Tom got there, which is why I asked my first question.
Like a shaky witness, I reach for the glass of water.
I know. I would love that. I mean, that would be fun to put you on the
stand.
Yeah. That's what we should have. There's a television program for
you actually have to take the oath before you get interviewed?
Yes. And the jury will be, but let's make the jury theater goers. We're going to create a program right here, which we'll get on British television, perhaps. And we'll put somebody, and then you'll have to, you'll have to respond to a series of questions about your work, and there'll be a bunch of critics and or theater goers over here. And
I like the bit where you go to jail if you lie.
or we'll have you all wired up.
Oh, yes.
So that there'll be, you know,
yes.
the meter goes.
Yes, and Bloomberg can actually show the lie detector thing going on.
All right. Well, just
anyway.
All right. So you know, we've created this notion. Number one, that you're interested in the classics, study of the classics. A. B. That you in your library and you discover Housman and you realize that there were interesting things about him, and he was a great poet. And he had this interesting relationship with Moses Jackson, who was quite unlike him. Unrequited Love.
Yes, yes.
And you create a play that opens, I guess, 1936, when Housman has died.
Yes, that's right.
And so does this play have a story?
It's interesting how selfish one really is underneath about these things. I didn't get into it in order that you should get something out of it. I got into it because what I was finding, and that's what matters, I think. Housman was investigating poets dead for 2,000 years who wrote about love and were enthralled to cruel mistresses, and others were enthralled to beautiful boys. And he was involved in a science, not an art. He was involved in the science of textual recovery, using his knowledge of language, of other poets, of the civilization. It's not an exact science, but it's a science. The art is in repairing the text, the science is in finding the corruption, the art is in actually recovering it, curing it. That, for me, was a powerful metaphor of something. In a way, it doesn't even matter what it's a metaphor of. It resonated, as we say. And that was one of the aspects, the fact that he wrote about love and death and was perhaps even slightly obsessed with death in his poetry, was also a resonating thing about Housman. And essentially, I think that plays get written because of some interplay between one's own temperament, one's own personality, and the material. I think that is a much more important interplay than any interplay even I might have theoretically with the material and some point it might have for you in the audience. That doesn't even cross my mind, actually, as a matter of fact. So I could find the point of the play, really. It wouldn't be that interesting because it would be half a lie, because it would be retrospective. It would be myself looking back and thinking, oh God, Charlie wants to know what the point is. Let me think, oh, I suppose that's a good possibility.
You know what?
It's not the process.
I know. The truth is, Charlie doesn't want to know what the point is. Charlie is interested in what kind of answer will be delivered from that question.
Oh, that's
my
the
truth.
Job. That's a good job.
It is.
Yes,
I mean, that's what I'm interested in.
That's good.
Now, having said that, do you, Amanda, who you know,
Yep.
doesn't want to read a review, doesn't want to sort of do anything special. She wants to go, you know, with a blank slate. And I mean, she wants to go and be challenged, interested, whatever the experience is. She wants to be, you know, talked to. She wants to listen. She wants to absorb. I want to read the reviews. I want to know. I want to read a biography of Housman. I want to know everything I can. Doesn't mean I'll do all that. Do you care which person attends your plays? Do you prefer one to the other? Do you admire one attitude more than the other?
It's not something I've ever given any thought to. I think that, you know, one wants to hold the attention and add to the experience of each member of the audience.
Right.
In any play at all. It can be a farce. You respond in your way. It's your temperament chiming with the play, and in Amanda's case, similarly. Just as a marginal issue almost, I was very pleased finding myself in the Gotham book shop in Manhattan today, that Housman is disappearing off the shelves, as indeed was Catullus and
Yes.
and associated texts. That's very nice to know.
That's perfect. That's
Yeah.
just great. I mean, and because it means, you know.
I was
And I
in-
assume when Copenhagen opened, the same thing happened to stories
Yep.
about Niels Bohr and
Yep.
ideas coming out of that kind of play.
Yeah. I used the Niels Bohr story, which I didn't have to invent, in a play of mine. I'll tell you, it might fill a little corner, if I can remember it right.
Yeah, try.
He was in a rented house, and there was a horseshoe on the wall, and his scientific, high-powered science friends would say, "Oh, Niels, for God's sake, surely you don't believe that a horseshoe brings you luck." And he said, No, but I'm told it works even if you don't believe it.
That's great. That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I like that story.
I do too. I like it a lot. That's almost like saying, you know, it's almost the notion of there are no atheists in foxholes, or B, you know, I'm not taking any chances. I don't believe, but necessarily, you know, I'm going to be praying all the way till my final breath. You know, just let's not.
There's a Hemingway vignette about that, about a soldier who starts calling on Jesus to save him, and he'll go to church every day and forever, and he survives and goes to the brothel.
Yes. I mean, that's also the story of the two people want a plane, and the plane is going down, and they say, we're going to have to ditch in the ocean. It's unlikely, you know, be prepared. You know, and so one starts confessing everything, all of his sins, everything that he's every possible imagined grievance, and and his spouse sitting next to him is listening to all this, and then the captain comes on and says, "I have great news. We have been able to restart the engine. It's not over." This play that is now in New York is how different from the play that opened, 3 years ago, in London?
It's the same. It's the same so far as one can say that about any two productions. The text is not identical. I trimmed some things, I put back some things, but you wouldn't know it by seeing the two. It's the same. Why wouldn't it be?
Well, I don't know. Maybe, I mean,
there's no such process as...
There's no reason that this should be more attractive to an English audience than an American audience. No. American audience's tastes are no different than an English audience taste.
No.
That's why plays go back and forth.
Yeah.
Roll tape. Here is a scene in which A.E. Housman, played by Richard Easton, realizes that he is talking with a younger version of himself.
When Oxford was still the sweet city of dreaming spires.
Must have been delightful then.
It was. I felt as if I'd come up from the plains of Moab to the top of Mount Pisgah, like Moses when the Lord showed him all the land of Judah unto the utmost sea.
There's a hill near the house where I live in Worcestershire, which I and my brothers and sisters call Mount Pisgah. I used to climb it often and look out towards Wales, to what I thought was a kind of promised land, though it was only the Clee Hills, really. Shropshire was our western horizon.
Oh, excellent. You are...
Housman, sir, of St. John's.
Well, this is an unexpected development. Where can we sit down before philosophy finds us out? I'm not as young as I was, whereas you, of course, are.
Tell me about that scene. Just
Well,
the playwright looks at his own scene.
both characters are the same person at different ages, which is why the old chap said at the end there, "I'm not as young as I was, whereas you, on the other hand, are." I
Right.
think I've actually misquoted my own play there,
You know,
but
that's
near
okay, but
enough.
it's close.
And that's a scene where the elderly poet and scholar, on his way through Hades, encounters a young man. He finds himself in the Oxford of his youth,
Right.
and encounters a young man who is himself in his youth. And they sit on that bench, and they talk for, I think it's probably 20 minutes, about everything, love especially.
roll tape. This is another scene from Invention of Love, in which Moses Jackson, we have talked about Moses Jackson being the science student and the athlete, questions Housman, the younger Housman, about the nature of their friendship, these two very different people.
If that's the price for kisses due, it's the last kiss I steal from you. It's written to a boy, but never mind. It's an interesting poem, by the way. Vestaire for tours.
She thinks you're sweet on me.
Plural for singular, first use. What?
Rosa said you're sweet on me.
What did she mean?
Well, you know.
What did you say?
I said it was nonsense. We're chums. We've been chums since Oxford. You, me, and Pollard.
Did she think Pollard was sweet on you?
She didn't talk about Pollard. You're not, are you, House?
You're my best friend!
That's what I said, like...
Theseus and Pirithous!
The Three Musketeers!
What did she say?
She hasn't read it.
I don't understand. You mean, just from Saturday? Just from going home together in the train from Ealing?
I suppose so, yes. It was odd, Chamberlain being there that day.
Why?
Well, it was just odd, an odd coincidence. I was going to mention it.
Mention what?
Mention that perhaps you shouldn't get to be pals with him too much. It may be misunderstood.
You think Chamberlain is sweet on me?
No, of course not. But one has heard things about Chamberlain at the office. I'm sorry now I mentioned it. I know I'm all hobnails, but you're right about it, aren't you, House? You see, I'm awfully strong on Rosa. She's not like other girls. She's not what I'd call a girl at all. You saw that for yourself. She's a woman. We love each other.
I'm glad for you, Mo. I liked her very much.
Did you? I knew you would. You're a good pal to me, and I hope I am to you. I knew I only had to ask you, and that would be the end of it. I'll tell her she's a cuckoo. Shake hands?
Gladly.
Still pals?
Comrades, like whoever they were. Theseus and Pirithous.
What's appealing to you about Oscar Wilde?
What isn't? Apart from his wit and generosity.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, right. Larger than life.
Genius.
Yeah.
Um,
But there are other people with wit and generosity and larger than life genius.
yes. It's actually, one thinks one can find out what people are really and truly like by reading everything. But I don't know that one can, because what was and could be published that was contemporary with them for 1900 wouldn't tell the whole truth by any means. Even in their private letters, there was a great deal of reticence, which was simply good manners and so on. And I suspect that we've got the whole thing wrong, perhaps with Housman especially, where one has got a sense of a rather cold, dry person. Of course, he did have a congenial side and a convivial side. In the case of Wilde, perhaps the reported Wilde is closer to the Wilde that was. When you say what do I like or love about him, I have no special knowledge of him which would, give you a surprising answer. But I think that he was truly a generous man, and I think that's more rare than it seems.
Did you want him more in this play?
No, on the contrary, as I worked out how I could use Wilde, my whole idea was to have him as a constantly invoked off-stage presence who finally appears on stage very near the end of the play,
right.
which is what we do. There have been a lot of Wildes, of course, because the centenary
right.
occurred.
There have been one-man performances and everything.
Absolutely.
Do you have literary heroes other than Oscar Wilde?
there are writers whose books, when I first encountered them, made an enormous impression on me, and whose books I've continued to love. Is that a literary hero? I'm not sure if that's quite the same thing. I told somebody the other day that I felt exactly like that about Hemingway, and this person was extremely surprised. I don't know
whether they liked Hemingway or not. Huh?
Apparently, I'm not an obvious fit with love. I love Hemingway. I love Evelyn Waugh simply.
Why do you love Hemingway?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, because I think that he was one of the few writers of the century who did invent something, create something, a way of writing prose. I mean, he did, in a way which is probably much more remarkable to his contemporaries than to us now. He did reforge American prose. He got it from here and there. I think Huckleberry Finn is a source, Hart Crane, but essentially he did what nobody else had really done to American prose, and my God, what an effect it had. From then on, of course, people were trying to write like him consciously or unconsciously, well, for the next generation and more, 30 or 40 years. You know, it's very difficult to talk about Hemingway and Fitzgerald together as prose writers, as prose stylists. In every other way, it's impossible not to speak about them together. But it's interesting, and Fitzgerald was just slightly earlier in his first published work, I think, just slightly earlier, wasn't he, than Hemingway. But it's interesting that although they are yoked together by violence, as Dr. Johnson said, not of them, they really are very, very different writers. I don't know whether you came across that early version of Gatsby published last year called Trimalchio. It's an interesting read to see, as it were, the first draft of The Great Gatsby. But the great Gatsby is all in the first draft. I mean, there are paragraphs in there which are, you know, for the anthologies. And there are paragraphs which Hemingway not only could not have written, but would have had no interest in writing. They were luxurious. It's luxurious writing, Fitzgerald, wonderful writing. And in my youth, you picked sides among your friends according to who preferred Hemingway to Fitzgerald and vice versa.
And you picked Hemingway even then?
Oh yeah, I did. More so than now. I've learned to appreciate Fitzgerald more since.
Yeah. Elegant would be more descriptive of Fitzgerald?
Yes. I mean, you know, Hemingway's work is now recognizable in tough guy literature.
Yeah.
It's inescapable, in fact. Fitzgerald seemed to be, and indeed was, a more educated writer.
Why do you think people would be surprised that you would like Hemingway so much?
I suppose because of the kind of conversation we've been having. It doesn't seem to connect in many places with
that someone who would like action?
Well, yes, there's that. Who was obsessed with death in a quite different way. He actually, I mean, Housman, we mentioned earlier, was, I said, may have been obsessed with death. That's rather overstating it. But he wrote about death, or put death into his poems very frequently. But that has got absolutely nothing to do with what we're now talking about in respect of Hemingway, who wanted to describe the event. You know, there's a wonderful thing, by the way. I mean, gosh, I'm sorry, there isn't time to go into anything. I sort of skate around like a.
Why do you think it's not time? There is time. Go.
There's a wonderful, wonderful thing in one of those Hemingway vignettes about the bullfight. It must be it must be one of the little bits in Our Time, where he describes the death of a bullfighter from the point of view of the bullfighter. And as near as I can recall it, it's like a cinematograph which commences to go faster and faster, and then he was dead. Don't know why that always struck me as being quite a plausible intuition.
Does it surprise you at all that Hemingway would commit suicide?
Well, I was surprised at the time, shocked, stunned. I remember meeting a friend of mine in Cambridge Circus in London, and we had a third friend called George who was very passionate about Hemingway. And I met this friend of mine by arrangement in the street. We were doing something, and he came up to me in the street and he said, "Oh, let's go and see if George is wearing a black tie." And I thought, Hemingway's dead, and he was.
Wow. What was it, 63? It was about 63.
61, I think.
61, yeah.
Yep.
Invention of Love, Tom Stoppard, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here, as always.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
It is a rich play. The last time we were here, I shouldn't do this to you, but I will. We talked about a play in progress.
Yes.
About Russia. 3 stories. 3.
Yes.
How are we doing on that?
We're in the second one, Charlie. Can we not talk about it anymore? I'm doing it in my hotel.
My apologies. We'll be right back. Stay with us.